Hi, good afternoon. My name is David Hunter. I'm a solution architect at the Met Office, the UK's National Weather and Climate Service. You probably know us best from the weather forecast that you probably see on the telly or the radio, and you probably think we're a big science organisation, which we are, and maybe a big data organisation, which we absolutely are. But we also do a huge amount of work in web applications in both public and commercial spaces, and it's some of that stuff we'd like to talk to you about today, and Angular specifically. I've been the aviation stream lead for the last 18 months, 2 years, and we've done a number of agile projects with the cross-site team, which is part of what I want to talk about, and they've all been based in Angular. And it's been an interesting experience, and we thought we'd share some of the maybe mistakes we've made and some of the lessons we've learned. We usually do most of our dev in-house, but for this series of projects, we're working with a third party, Purple Secure Systems, and two of their devs are going to come and speak in a minute. The Met Office provided the product ownership and the Scrum Master roles, and Purple provided the development team. And the development team based in Bristol, and the Met Office is based in Exeter, and if you know the Southwest at all, it's about an hour and a half away, so it's not exactly a co-located team, and it's not easy to just drop in for a quick chat. So, our first project went okay, delivered, not exactly on time, went a bit late, wasn't quite as feature complete as we'd like, was a bit more stressful than we'd liked, and kind of just felt like it had some grit in the gears. So we spent some time post that project in a fairly big end of project retro to discuss what had gone wrong, what were the issues, and how we could make it better. And fundamentally it boiled down to how we were communicating within our team. It's one of the agile principles that the best way of conveying information within a team is face-to-face, and we did nearly all of ours on the phone. We did planning meetings on the phone, we did retros on the phone, we did stand-ups on the phone, and we had the odd video conference thrown in there as well, but it was pretty much a separation. And what that really caused was a couple of problems. The biggest one is that the relationship between people just doesn't form when you have that kind of distance, and you don't get the sense in the room when you're having a conversation with someone, when you're looking them in the eye, and you get the body language of whether they're understanding what you're saying, or whether they're getting confused, all that sort of stuff. So communication is tricky, but also it's the relationship that you form when you spend time together was kind of lost. So what we decided to do post that project was commit a bit of time to actually spending time together, and we made sure that at least every 2 weeks with our sprint cadence, that at least every 2 weeks we spent a day together as a team in one of the locations, either at Bristol or Exeter, and we'd do our retros together. We'd actually do our planning together, and we'd do our reviews together, and we'd eat together, and just spend some time making that team. It's very easy to think of teams being the development team and forget all the other people that are involved. So we really worked on that, and because of that, we started forming much better relationships, and it was a new relationship between these two companies. And when that relationship was in its early stages, it's very easy to fall into this sort of customer-supplier thing, and you don't have that relationship and that trust and honesty to be able to say to each other, I don't know what you're doing, or you're making a mistake with this, or you haven't given me this, or that's just not working. So we spent time together, we worked on that, and we spent some time in our retros. And the biggest thing we found post that was, again, how we were communicating information within that team, even when we were getting face-to-face, was just kind of not right. We'd fallen into a bit of a trap, really, with relying on electronic communication. So we were putting our user stories into Jira, and we were having conversations in there, and a lot of information was being misinterpreted or missed by having comments on the story, comments on the acceptance criteria, comments on comments, and there was a lot of stuff going on in there, and a lot of noise, and the original requirement and that original user need was kind of get lost in that noise. So we flipped things around, and we said, you know what, this user story, we need to change the focus of it a little bit. And we'd, I think, got slightly trapped, again, by using the user story template, and I think that's a really easy crutch to think you're doing good user stories by following that template. The as I want, so that kind of is really good for helping you pick out who, where, and why, or why and what. And they're really important questions you need to get to when you're trying to understand what you're doing. But just following that pattern doesn't mean you're getting good requirements, and it's very easy to fall into that trap. So we flipped things around. We said, you know what, the user story is not going to be the be-all and end-all as written. This is not a specification that we're working to. It's going to become a reminder to have and a reminder of a conversation. And that conversation, that face-to-face understanding that you get when everybody is talking about the same thing is massively valuable, and it really raises that common level of understanding. And that's a key phrase, I'll probably say it a few times, but you really need to work on that in team, particularly between devs and various business stakeholders and product owners. So getting together, spending time together, face-to-face communication became massively important. And obviously that's an issue for cross-site teams, but that can actually affect co-located teams. If you're not talking as much, it's very easy to use electronic stuff to have conversations when actually you should just be talking to each other and get some of that stuff out. So what do we do post that? We also picked up on a little thing, a little trick that was really useful for us. We did something called a story kickoff meeting. So at the beginning of every story, as a developer picks it up off the backlog, we'll have a really short conversation, 2, 3, 5 minutes, nothing major, between the developer and the product owner, and maybe the Scrum Master, and if you've got a BA or any of those other people who form your 3 amigos or how many amigos you have. Have a quick chat, describe what the developer's going to do, why they're doing it, what they're going to achieve at the end. Just try and avoid any of those little misunderstandings that may have crept in since your planning meeting, because that could have been a week before you start doing a piece of work. Make sure that common level understanding is really in there, because without that, you're going to really struggle. So another thing we kind of realized that we hadn't quite got right was our roles and responsibilities weren't right. And this is really another key thing when you're setting up teams. We'd started a fairly new agile stuff at the Met Office, certainly. I think the Purple guys had done a bit more than us. And our product owners, our Scrum Masters, it was fairly new to them, and they didn't really understand exactly what their role was. And we ended up having our backlog being a bit of a free-for-all that nobody really understood or owned, and we had stakeholders just chucking stuff into it, and any man and his dog seemed to be throwing stuff into it and reordering stuff, and there was no ownership. And our Scrum Master kind of got caught in a trap of trying to fill a lot of roles. They were trying to own that backlog, which is kind of a product owner's job, and they were trying to gather requirements and write requirements on their own, trying to do sort of business analysis to it on jobs, and they were doing project management, and they were trying to do technical coordination between the Met Office side and the Purple side, and you just can't have that many hats and do your job very well. So a really key thing we looked at is understanding what the roles are in these teams and getting someone to do them properly. So we spent some time looking at the fact that our requirements gathering really wasn't up to scratch, and we brought someone in who had actual experience doing that to support the product owner, who it's often assumed will do that role, and to support the team in understanding what we're trying to do. I've spoken to a number of companies, and it seems fairly common, especially when they're starting their agile journeys, if they're using things like Scrum, to assume that just because a role doesn't exist in Scrum that you don't do that job. The main roles in Scrum being the product owner and the Scrum Master and the team, there's no place for business analysis, for design, for project management, but these things are really important activities, and just because they don't have a role name doesn't mean you shouldn't do them. And obviously that will depend somewhat on the scale of your project. But don't just assume that doesn't exist, that a product owner knows how to do that. If you give someone the badge of product owner, doesn't mean they understand how to own a product. You need to understand what your role should be and fill that with someone who can actually do that job. So, our first project was a little rocky, but we spent time figuring out what the problems were, our communication problems. Our second was so much better, our third has been even better than that, and our fourth has been fantastic. And the relationship we now have has been really good. I'm really proud of all the work we've been doing. It's really been great fun leading those teams. So I've got a few takeaway points from my little section before we get to the Angular bit, which is the bit you're probably most interested in, which these guys will talk about. You know, talk to each other. This isn't just a cross-site issue. You've really got to get communicating with each other. It's really easy for a lot of techies who like to just sit in their corner and give me a list of things to do, I'll do my work, and I'll send it over to somebody else. You've got to talk to each other. Determine your roles, don't fill the gaps. I've really been guilty of that through my career in leading teams, going, okay, there's a space over here that nobody's doing, and to get it over the line, I'll go and do that job as well. Don't just fill the gaps, it doesn't help to be a superhero. Find the roles and responsibilities and get people who can actually do those jobs to fill those gaps. And work on your retros, it's the key agile meeting. Without that, nothing is going to succeed. Agile can feel like a lot of meetings if you're not careful, but the retrospective is the one that really starts everything off. If you get that right, everything else plays out of that. So, let's get to the Angular bit, because that's probably the bit you're most interested in. Our first project out the gate for us was a project called General Aviation, and it's a project for pilots to do their pre-flight briefing, trying to find out what the weather is where they're leaving from en route and to where they're going to land. And it's a really safety-critical thing, so this is really important, and we built that in Angular. And here to give you some insight into that is Elizabeth Robinson from Purple Secure. Here she is. Give her a clap.
All right, thanks, Dave. Okay, so I'm going to talk now about some of our experiences in Angular, focusing in particular on our lessons learned in keeping our data up to date. So when we started developing, we were developing May, June time in 2014, and we used Angular 1.3. We were developing on top of the Met Office infrastructure, so let's call it brownfield development. These are also large enterprise-scale apps. So what we found is we sometimes had to adopt the recommended best practices. Right, so we had to keep the data up to date. Living in the UK, the data changes all the time. So anyway, so the data had to keep it up to date. Right, so our request for the data had to take this form of the web service, the data type, and then the timestamp. So the timestamp referred to what time that data was updated. So there were many different data types: forecast data, observed data, and lots of aviation-specific data that the pilots needed to make those decisions about whether to fly or not. So we knew what type of data we were going to have. The pilot had made that decision about looking at that part of the app. The timestamp, however, we had to get this from a capabilities web service. So we'd poll the capabilities web service every 5 minutes, and then that capabilities web service would contain an object containing the timestamps. When there are any changes, we'd notice those changes, and then we'd be able to go and get more data from the web service. So in front of all this was sitting a Akamai cache to try and reduce the traffic to the back end. Okay, so the recommended Angular approach to keeping the data on the scope is to have a data service as a handle all of your getting the data. So this is coming out of John Papper's style guide, and it uses Angular 1.4. We became aware of this just after we started developing. So the data service would be injected. It would expose get methods. The get method would go off and get the data web service method. The data service would get the method. Data service would go and get the data from the web service. It would then return a promise to the controller. The promise will then be resolved when the data is returned, and the data could then be placed on the scope. So what we were finding when we tried to use this method was that we had data services to handle all of our different data types. And in some cases, we'd have a bit of an overuse of dependency injection, and our data services contained boilerplate code. And also, we have that timestamp. We have to get that timestamp from the capabilities web service. What should handle that? Should that be the data service themselves, or should something else handle that? So the way that we tried to approach this was we used two things. The first is the publish-subscribe design pattern. So this is a known design pattern to handle events. It allows you to keep dependencies light, and it allows you to only subscribe and publish to the appropriate messages. So from an Angular point of view, your data services don't need to know what's on the scope. So here's some code of our subscribe and publish. We're just listening and publishing to the root scope. We use this in conjunction with two classes, GenericDayService. So this handled all of our getting and retrieval of data. So for each type of aviation data, it subscribed to a topic for the get data, and it would publish to a aviation topic for send data. Then to handle the changes in the URL, we had an Endpoint Manager. This continuously polled the capabilities web service every 5 minutes and handled any of the updating. It would expose a method for the data services to get the updated URL. So in general use, our controller would come into scope. The generic data service will be sitting there. The controller data service would subscribe to the send message and the data out of date message. It would then publish to the generic data service to go and get me data, so get message. The generic data service will handle that retrieval of data. When that asynchronous request is finished, it would retrieve that data and then publish it to the controller. The controller will take that and display it to the user. To keep the data up to date, we had a scheduling component and the Endpoint Manager. The scheduling component would tick, and the Endpoint Manager would listen out to those ticks and then go and check the capabilities web service. If anything had changed, then it would publish that the data is out of date. The controller would be listening to that, and it would be able to handle that as it saw fit, normally to go and get more data. So this was our first app in June 2004, and over the time we've improved our use of Angular. So the key things, really, we've started using promises more. We started adopting the promises design pattern. So I said that we had some of our code was repeated within our services. We've pulled more of our logic out of the controllers and more into the services. It's allowed the controllers to be reusable and services to be reusable and our controllers to be light. We also no longer needed to use the capabilities web service. We could use the HTTP status codes 304, which is not modified. We continued to use our messaging pattern, but more to handle the events, so go and get new data. Also, we continued using our agile, improving with our agile, and our our retrospectives included a technical component. So we were able to iron out any issues we had and work on things that we thought could do with improvement, and anything that we liked, we could continue developing to use in our later apps. We also made a better use of our Sprint Zero. So instead of just developing a skeleton app in our Sprint Zero, we'd start trying to really iron out any issues, trying to work out where the crunch points were for the next app and where we're likely to have problems. So our key lessons learned was that logic should be out of the controllers. It should all be in your services. Your services should be data-specific. Promises are great. And spend time understanding the expert's advice and make use of your Sprint Zero. Right, so I will now introduce Dave to the stage, who will be talking about a feature common across all the apps, the common map.
Thanks, Lizzie, and thanks to Dave before as well. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you today about the common map component, which, as Lizzie said, is a feature of all these applications. And what that component does is allow the users, pilots in this case, to get a rich picture of the weather conditions using a combination of observed and forecast data. So we'll start off by looking at the objectives that we had in developing this component. So what the high-level objective was to provide users with powerful weather visuals by combining existing data sources. So the Met Office is a world-leading organization in forecasting weather data, so they've got loads of really good data, and what we want to do is combine that data into products, which is useful for different sectors, in this case, aviation. So we want to visualize a variety of tile-based weather layers on our map. We want to animate those layers, showing weather at different time intervals. We want to overlay some static layers which are pertinent to these users, such as areas of controlled airspace. We want to overlay location-specific weather information, such as current weather at UK airports and forecasts for those locations. And we're going to use existing web services that the Met Office already have. We're going to update displays when the new time intervals become available, and we're going to make that into a common component that we can use across multiple applications. So let's take a quick look at the common map component so you guys know what it is that we're talking about. So here it is in its most basic form. And all we really have here is a directive which is instantiating open layers and loading some base map tiles in from mapbox.com. And you'll see in the bottom left corner of the display, there's a small control. That is our layer picker. That uses a UI bootstrap accordion to organize the layers into coherent groups for the users. So there's many layers in here, as you can see. And selecting one of these layers loads that tile-based layer onto the map. So in this case, it's the rainfall radar. So there's a control just above the layer picker, which is a layer legend, giving the user more information about the layer that's been selected. And underneath the layer picker control, there's a layer stepper control, which allows the user to move through the time intervals for the currently selected layer, and also play through at 2 different speeds. So there's a large control at the bottom of the display, which is the timeline, and that gives the user a visual cue as to the currently selected time step, but they can also jump between time steps by directly clicking on that. The map is fully responsive, so it works well on tablet and mobile devices. This was a key requirement for the pilots who wanted to be able to get the weather information wherever they were, provided they have a data connection. So let's talk a little bit now about the approach that we took to developing this component. We implemented it as a Bower component, so we could easily drop it into new products as we created them. We used a reusable component design with Angular directives, and we used Angular services to encapsulate our business logic.
So let's look at the directives we have. We've got a highly configurable top-level directive that packages the map and the controls together. Now, what that allows us as developers to do when we're starting a new product is get a lot of rich map functionality very quickly by dropping in this top-level directive and some configuration to tailor it for that new application. We've got another directive that loads map instances into the DOM, as we saw on the first screenshot earlier. We've got directives to handle map events, such as bootstrapping, user interaction, and the updating of layers. And we can create map markers with another directive and a whole marker layer just using ng-repeat and that marker directive. And as you've already seen, we can create reusable UI controls. So, a little now on the services. We can use services to load in our layer configuration from existing XML-based web services at the Met Office. And that tells us information about what's available in the layer cache at the Met Office, which is the web service where the tile-based layers come from. We've got a service to abstract the mapping technology away. So if at any one point we needed to switch away from open layers, we could do. And we can build map objects such as the map itself, the layers, and the markers with services, and manage the lifecycle of those objects too. And finally, encapsulate our directive business logic away into those services too. So that was a lot of information, a lot of components. Let's have a quick look at that now in an architecture diagram. So we've got our directives in yellow at the top, the map package at the very top, encapsulating those lower level directives. And then we have sandwiched in the middle there the services, which is the business logic for those directives. And then on the lower level, we've got services for configuration, management of layers, and abstraction of mapping technology. So just to illustrate now where our directives are in the interface, I've drawn some boxes around the components. So map package, as I said, encapsulates all of those UI controls. We've got the MoMap directive, controlling the map itself and the layers that go onto the map. We've got the layer picker, the layer legend, the layer stepper, and finally, the layer timeline. So we're just going to round up today by giving you an idea of the kind of applications that we use this map component for. So it's currently used in 4 Met Office applications, 2 more are in development, and I'm pleased to say that we're now prototyping using Angular 2. So this is HeliBrief. This is a tool for helicopter pilots. We briefly saw it earlier, and this time it has the Meta and TAF slide-out panel on the right-hand side. That is coded weather information that pilots understand. And on the map, we've got Meta color states, and that allows the pilots to quickly get an overview of weather across the country. So here it is again. This time it's in a product called Open Runway, and we've got the rainfall radar overlay combined with aerodrome warning markers at UK airports. And this tool is used by airports themselves to make sure that it is safe for runways to stay open. Here it is in general aviation, which Dave and Lizzie mentioned earlier. Very similar view, except we've got a planning winds layer over the top here, showing wind and temperature at altitude. And we've also got a marker selection here on Edinburgh Airport, so you've got details of the meta at that specific location. And finally, we've got Visualize. So this is a product for the renewable energy sector, and what those guys are in is what those guys are interested in is the protection of their assets, such as wind turbines, and the protection of their personnel. So they're really interested in the weather for those purposes. So that's everything from us today. I hope you've enjoyed our talk, and now it's lunchtime. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, folks. That's great.